All right, everyone. I'm excited to introduce my next guest. He wrote and directed Star Trek 2 and 6, co-wrote Star Trek 4, directed The Day After, and Volunteers, author of numerous Sherlock Holmes novels, including The 7% Solution, which he also wrote the screenplay for, and his latest Sherlock Holmes novel, Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing. Welcome to the show, Nicholas Meyer. Hey.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for that introduction.
Well, thank you for making like every great thing that I watched. I appreciate that. I got to say, I haven't read Sherlock Holmes until I just read your book. So this was the first. I know you as a Sherlock Holmes guy probably don't want to hear that. Your Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing was my first Sherlock Holmes novel.
Oh, you never read this? You never read any Doyle?
I never read any Doyle. I'd never somehow that missed me. All the Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I'm aware of Sherlock Holmes. Not like I don't know Sherlock,
It's like we're discussing the Dead Sea Scrolls, but you've never read any of the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's not uncommon. Well, anyway, thank you for reading my book.
I enjoyed it very much. And it came out on my birthday. So, extra bonus.
You couldn't miss.
How did you fall in love with Sherlock Holmes? Like what's the origin of that path?
I think that childhood experiences, things that happen when you're very young, with people, with art, with scenery, with events. Now, there's a reason why it's called an impressionable age. You bond with experiences from that period. They leave a lasting, you should pardon the expression, impression. And when I was about 11, my father gave me the complete Sherlock Holmes stories of Arthur Conan Doyle. There are 60. There are 56 short stories and 4 novellas. I think it may be fairly said that I inhaled them. And I guess the shorthanded way of saying is I never sort of outgrew them, let's say. They were a source of endless interest and enjoyment and even puzzlement that has lasted a lifetime. So I've now written 7 Holmes stories of my own.
Pastiche. I learned that word. Pastiche? Pastiche? Like writing in
the... yeah, it's funny. It has a vaguely pejorative connotation for me, which sort of bugs me. Would we refer, for example, to the Odyssey as a pastiche simply because it has characters from the Iliad in it? I don't think we do. And so I make the case that all art is a history of cut and paste. Just we add to it. Somebody put his handprint on the wall of a cave, and people have been doing things to that handprint ever since. I like to think of these as novels, as found Watson manuscripts. If you want to call me a pasticheur, okay, I won't quibble, but I'll go on the record as sniffing at the term.
I thought it was meant as a compliment because I thought it was the way when I was reading it, it was that you were the best at writing the Conan Doyle novels like Sherlock Holmes, like he was. Like people read yours and they were the closest thing to the real thing.
The fact of the matter is, and I would love to agree with you, but once the floodgates opened, and in a way, I suppose they were opened by the 7% Solution, my first Holmes pastiche. But there were other Holmes imitations before, and there have been other Holmes imitations since. And some of them, I'm prepared to concede, are just as good, if not better than mine, but not going to help the competition, so we'll just leave off names.
The 7% Solution, that was one of your early greatest hits, right? I mean, the book was huge.
Oh, that was my greatest hit. That was 40 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Then it became a movie. Then I got an Oscar nomination for my screenplay. That gave me my 15 minutes of fame.
That's a good run. That must have been a really good year for books turning into movies too, because you were on that bestseller list with Jaws and Centennial.
Yes. It was back when people read books. I've just read in the I think, the New York Times that over the past 20 years, book reading has dropped 40% because everybody is on their smartphone all the time. I don't go on that often because I hate the fact that my phone is smarter than I am, and I just don't want to be in competition with it. So I kind of stick to books.
There's something nice about books. I still really enjoy going to when I can find a Barnes and Noble and just kind of being surrounded by all the things that people have written. There's something nice about holding a book. Like when I read your
I like books. I like books on shelves. I think they are the intellectual and emotional insulation of a home.
I agree. No, but there's something like reading, so I read, the hard, tangible copy of Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing.
Thank you.
I read your memoir, but I read that on Kindle. So I enjoy.
Okay, I still get a piece.
No, I just meant it's a different. I like holding something. There's something nice about holding something and reading it. So the 7% solution, you wrote this you had time. There was a strike. Another one.
I came to Hollywood from New York in 1971, hoping to break into, wanted to make movies. And I started having some success with a couple of television movies that were off the beaten path, I would say. One of them was based on a Chinese detective hero from the 7th century, a Tang Dynasty judge. I think ABC ordered up that movie under the mistaken impression that they were going to get a kung fu movie. But Judge Dee in the Haunted Monastery, it's one of a whole series of Chinese detective novels based on that character. And the other one was a CBS movie about the Orson Welles Halloween radio broadcast of the War of the Worlds that sent the whole country, or a good portion of it, into a panic. And so I was just starting to work up a credible head of professional steam when the Writers Guild went on strike, which we do whenever we can. And I said I wasn't allowed to write screenplays. My girlfriend said, well, now you can write that Sherlock Holmes meets Sigmund Freud novel that you keep yammering about. And she was right, because I was allowed to write a novel. So when I wasn't walking up and down outside the Goldwyn Studios with a picketing placard, I wrote my Holmes novel. And one of the things that I was trying to do was sort of put Holmes back in the Arthur Conan Doyle place where I so strongly felt he belonged. I really hated all those Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce. I didn't like any Sherlock Holmes movies. I only liked the stories that I had experienced when I was 11. And in those stories, Watson is not an idiot, because I could never understand when I tried to watch the other movies, why does a genius hang out with a jerk? It just didn't make any sense to me. And I didn't believe that the Nigel Bruce character was the one who wrote down the case histories that I was in love with. In fact, if I were to take this one step further, I subsequently learned that Sigmund Freud's favorite bedtime reading were the Sherlock Holmes stories. In fact, if you now read some of Freud's case history, The Rat Man, Anna O, The Wolf Man, it is possible to discern a sort of imitating of Watson's style when you read Freud's case histories. And I think it's fair to say he might have been influenced. Let's not forget that not only was Freud a doctor, but so was Watson, and so was his creator. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a doctor. So there are dots to be connected here.
How long had this idea been kind of gestating when you finally got this moment during the strike that you're like, okay, how much of it was already kind of formed in your head?
A fair amount. I had been thinking about, well, let's put another word. My father was a psychiatrist, and people in high school would say, oh, your old man's a shrink. Is he a Freudian? And I didn't know. So I said, Pop, are you a Freudian? And he said, well, it's kind of a silly question. I said, why is that? And he said, because it's no more possible to discuss the history of psychoanalysis and not at least begin with Freud than it is to discuss the history of the discovery of the North American continent by Europeans and not start with Columbus or the Vikings if you want to get cute, but to suppose that nothing has happened since the Vikings is pretty rigid, pretty doctrinaire. When a patient comes to see me, I listen to what they say. I listen to how they say it. I'm very interested in what they do not say. I'm curious how they're dressed. Are they on time? What's their body language? I am, in short, searching for clues from them as to why they're not happy. I said, gee, Pop, that sounds like detective work. And he said, well, I guess it is like detective work in a way. And that's when I realized who my dad always reminded me of. He always reminded me of Sherlock Holmes. So then I wondered, how much did Arthur Conan Doyle know about the life and writing of Sigmund Freud? And the first thing you realize is, oh, they're both doctors. They both died in the same town within 9 years of each other. You know, there's a lot of dots on this page. And then we find out that Sherlock Holmes was a cocaine addict. And then we learn that Sigmund Freud, for a time, was also a cocaine user. So Mrs. Meyer's oldest is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. So when you ask what the timetable for the 7% is, about 10 years of, collecting all these miscellaneous dots until they were ready to, form a complete picture in my mind, at which time the Writers Guild conveniently left me to my own devices, and I got to write the book.
Once you sat down, how long did it take to kind of flow out of your head onto the typewriter?
Once I started writing?
Yeah.
Oh, it was the better part of a year.
10 years gestating, about a year to write it, 40 weeks bestseller. It's not bad.
I think there are two basic methods of creativity. We'll call them the Mozart method and the Beethoven method. Mozart did it all in his head. He was apparently a very good pool player. And so while he was shooting pool, he would write a piano concerto or a string quartet, and then he would copy it out. And there's very few corrections in a Mozart manuscript, very few. With Beethoven, all you have to do is look at the sketchbooks, and there are sketchbooks, to see the whole process hideously, exhaustively, eternally externalized. I think, writers or artists fall somewhere in between these two extremes. I began by doing a lot of stuff in my head, and then at a certain point I started writing down notes so I wouldn't lose track, and the older I get, the more notes I seem to make.
How long after you wrote it did you, by the time it got published and you're dealing with the legal ramifications of the Doyle estate? That's an interesting story in your book.
Well, somebody said, where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. And what happened to me was that I, in my ignorance, thought that, or convinced myself, that Sherlock Holmes was in the public domain, only to learn that he was not. And I had to deal with the very avaricious and mismanaged and greedy Conan Doyle estate. I got lucky. It's the only way you can describe it. I got lucky. The solution was not a 7% solution, I have to say. Nothing that convenient, but I was lucky. They said, under these conditions, yes, okay. I continued to pay them a slice until Holmes was well and true in the public domain, and now anybody can write their own Sherlock Holmes story, and unfortunately, many people do.
But not everyone is you. All right, so they make it a movie, killer cast, Robert Duvall, Alan Arkin, Vanessa Redgrave, Sir Laurence Olivier. That's got to be pretty cool. Your breakout novel, now this huge...
Oh, the whole thing was like a dream. I'd never added up to anything in my whole life until I sat down and wrote this book. And suddenly, it was like, the floodgates opened. I caught a wave. Suddenly people were interested in Sherlock Holmes. They hadn't been in a while. He was sort of in eclipse. And this sort of brought him back from literary or cultural obscurity. Luck plays a big part in all this. Somebody recommended a general to Napoleon and said, this guy's a very good general. And Napoleon said, I know he's good, but is he lucky? I think that I got exceptionally lucky. Now, I got to write the screenplay for the movie because I made it a condition of the sale. The fact that the screenplay got nominated for an Oscar, lucky, more luck.
That's cool, though. You got to adapt your own thing and get nominated for it. That's a huge deal. It's also a huge deal that you reinvigorated the interest in Sherlock Holmes, which you would later do, kind of save Star Trek. We'll get to that.
Okay.
No, that's really cool. I found Siskel and Ebert clip on YouTube where Ebert had this killer mustache, by the way. It's worth looking up. He called it a witty and stylish comedy. You got a good thumbs up review. And then the other movies it came out at, Star is Born, Barbra Streisand, King Kong, Network, Silver Streak, and Rocky were right around that same time. That's quite a time for movies.
Yes. I think The Wrath of Khan came out the same time as E.T. and some other, I was always traveling in good company.
Yeah, there was a period where when you look back, it's like crazy how many amazing things came out.
Well, the 70s.
Yeah. All right. So then you wrote another. Then they had you write the West End Horror, your second Holmes novel, and you've written until this day your latest. Nay, let's plug the book one more time.
You can't plug it enough. I think it's a good novel. It's about art forgery. I think the subject of forgery generally poses some very intriguing questions. It poses legal questions. It poses ethical questions. It poses aesthetic questions. It poses sort of cultural questions. I've been interested in forgery ever since I got called a forger for my Sherlock Holmes novel. And I thought, I hadn't even thought of it that way. And then I realized, well, yeah, I guess I am a forger. Forgery is a rabbit hole that you can totally get lost in, a rabbit hole that leads to other rabbit holes. What's the difference, for example, between a forgery and a copy? Something you can't see, the intention. A copy announces itself. I'm a copy. You can buy me at the museum store. Forgery tries to pass itself off as the real thing. What's the difference between a forger and a plagiarist? Plagiarist tries to convince you that someone else's work is his. A forger tries to convince you that his work is someone else's. It gets messy real fast.
You really consider yourself a forger? Because it's a unique thing, and you're doing it in this style, right? I mean, it's the same thing. You don't hide it. Wouldn't a real forger be like?
Well, you say you just opened up another category in the style of, okay, which the French have a phrase, à la manière de, in the manner of. So it's not strictly speaking a forgery. It's not a word for word mimicry, or as you might say, plagiarist of something, but it's in the style of. So now you've got chatbot. You can say, give me a painting in the style of Vincent van Gogh, and it'll cough up one for you. So yes, maybe my stuff could be in the manner of, à la manière de. It's an attempt. Interestingly enough, I was on a book tour with the 7% Solution. Back in those days, publishers paid. And I flew through a thunderstorm and landed in Pittsburgh. And the reporter who was sent to interview the kid best-selling author and felt this task was probably unworthy of his gifts, greeted me by saying, how does it feel to be a successful forger? And that really knocked me for a loop. I was feeling pretty green about the gills from the landing. But then I started thinking about, well, I guess I am a kind of forger. And that got me interested in the whole subject of forgeries. Here's another rabbit hole to go down. All works of art are ineluctably, inevitably, invariably products of the time in which they are created. Mozart doesn't just sound like Mozart. He sounds like mid-18th century European music. Renoir doesn't just look like Renoir. He also looks like late 19th century French Impressionism. And that's fine. This is the way it is. If I show you 5 movies that are all set in the year 1776, And one takes place in 1927, and one place it was made in 1943, and one is made in 2010. You'll be able to tell right away, within 5 minutes, 5 years, when those movies were made. Are they silent? Are they in color? Whatever, how much lighting for the candles and how long are the eyelashes? It'll give it away every time. Well, that's fine. We can all live with that. But you know who can't live with it? Is forgers. Because a forgery is also inevitably, invariably the product of the time in which it was created. So there was a very famous Dutch forger, Han van Meegeren, who in the early 30s produced Vermeers, famous Dutch master, limited output Vermeer. These Vermeers were celebrated and sold and are in museums and God knows where. All hundreds of thousands of pounds of profit for Han van Meegeren. But if you look at them today, they stink. They're terrible. They look like Art Deco, which is what they were, because those two are products of the time in which they're created. And I suppose my Sherlock Holmes stories, as time goes by, or maybe has gone by, will proclaim themselves as well products of the time and sensibilities during which they were created.
Well, I think they're awesome, whatever you want to call them. So the new book's awesome too.
What you must really do, if I may say so, is you should read a couple of the Doyle originals, and then you have something to measure them up against besides themselves.
I will. You got me. I started doing just some Sherlock Holmes research because you got me into it. It was my own little thing. I was like,
the short stories are the best ones, I think. The Red-Headed League, Silver Blaze, The Devil's Foot, The Speckled Band. You'll read. It takes you 20 minutes to read one, and they're simply amazing. They're simply amazing.
I'm going to dive in. Tell me, is this true or not? The phrase, which everyone knows, elementary, my dear Watson, that Doyle never actually wrote that exactly like that?
Yeah. And by the way, nobody in Casablanca ever says, play it again, Sam.
It's one of those. Okay. God. All right. Awesome. All right. So you talked about how your dad inspired you as you seeing him kind of as Sherlock Holmes. I read in your book, in terms of the path to loving movies, your dad was also involved. He took you to see Around the World in 80 Days. So, all right. So you see Around the World in 80 Days. You're inspired to make movies. The Panicked America, Judge Dee and the Monastery Murders, Invasion of the Bee Girls. I just rewatched Time After Time. Great movie.
Thank you. It was so much fun to make that I had such a good time, and I was helped by so many people that I came to the wrong conclusion, which was that making movies was easy. And, when the movie previewed through the roof and everybody was going nuts for it, I thought I knew how to do it. And I didn't. I just was lucky.
It was interesting because in your book, you talk about how studio was like, this isn't working.
Well, they hate it. They hate it. And this will astonish you, but I once had many rough edges. Now, of course, I'm a pussycat and I don't have any edges at all. But back then, they made a whole bunch of suggestions, gave me notes, and I didn't want to do any of their notes. I don't know if that's because they didn't make sense to me at the time or because I was simply being an obdurate jerk. But I wouldn't do them. I wanted to start the movie with the old Warner Brothers shield coming off at you and the Max Steiner fanfare, and they didn't want me to do that, but then I went and did it anyway. And by the time we were ready for the first preview, I suddenly realized that I had not only shot myself in the foot, I'd shot myself in the face and the balls and the heart. I had wrecked my whole career, and I drove out to this preview, and the two stars were no longer speaking to me because their agent hadn't liked the film. Then the movie started, and the Warner Brothers shield and the fanfare started, and people started yelling and clapping and screaming. And that was the next 2 hours. And I just sat there having an out-of-body experience because, going back to, but is he lucky?
It's interesting because they all hated it, but the screenings, like you were saying, and it opened huge, and people just loved the movie. Well, it is a great movie. All right, so wait, so Malcolm McDowell and Mary Steenburgen, they were mad at you at the premiere? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, their agent had not enjoyed the film, and suddenly they'd really lost all confidence. I was sitting directly behind them at the screening, and as the film was unspooling, all I saw were the silhouettes of two astounded looking people as they were staring at each other in disbelief at how this thing was playing. It was a disbelief that I shared, by the way. This was not how I expected things to happen.
It's interesting, like when you watch a movie, because Time After Time was this 70, late 79, something like that? Or, sometimes you watch a movie now and it's like, it's a little harder to watch older movies, you know what I mean? Just because some of them don't hold up as well. But this was great. I enjoyed it a lot. Fun seeing Malcolm McDowell as a good guy and not, because he always seemed like.
Well, that was another argument. When I said, what about Malcolm McDowell? And they said, but he always plays the bad guy. And I said, yeah, well, this time he'll play the good guy, and that's called acting. So, what can I tell you? You said you used the phrase a minute ago that slightly got to me when you talk about old movies. There's only two kinds of art. There's good art and there's bad art. And I think really great art, and I'm not putting my film in the category of great art, but I do think that great art does not date. It's one of the tests. We don't listen to Johann Sebastian Bach and patronize him by saying, oh, it's an oldie but a goodie. That isn't how Bach works. You don't look at the works of Da Vinci or Raphael and go, oh, this is not bad, for two coats. You are dumbstruck with awe at the great works of civilization. You don't patronize them. When I look at Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton, you don't go, where's the sound? Where's the color? You just look at genius in action. And there's nothing old about it. It's just wonderful. I should be so lucky.
Sometimes the movies are of the time, like we were saying earlier.
All art is no question.
And sometimes when you're sitting there, maybe in the modern sense, some things.
Well, let me put another idea out there, which was not my idea, but it was said to me by Stanley Donen, the director of Singing in the Rain, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, Charade. Stanley Donen, Two for the Road is a long list. And I got to know him a little bit. And he directed both Gene Kelly and he directed Fred Astaire. And a daughter of mine, who's now directed her first feature film yet to come out, once said to me, comparing Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire, that compared to Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly looks much more self-conscious. Fred Astaire, it's just kind of happening. And so I was talking with Stanley Donen, who directed them both. And I said, what do you think? He said, look, among the countless distinctions and divisions into which you can categorize art and artists is this one, that there are artists who never let you forget that you are experiencing them. When you watch Marlon Brando, you are fucking watching Marlon Brando. It's not Stanley Kowalski, it's Marlon Brando as Stanley Kowalski, Marlon Brando as Terry Malloy. When you're looking at a movie directed by Federico Fellini, you are not permitted to forget for one frame that you are watching Federico Fellini. But he said, then there's also what he called, Stanley Donen, the great invisibles. Alec Guinness. You just can't see it happening. He becomes the person, and you're in the story. You're not looking at Alec Guinness as Jock Sinclair or Colonel Nicholson or whatever. You're just looking at the story. And Fred Astaire, you can't see him breaking a sweat. It just seems to be happening, and you're not watching the effort. When you see De Sica, the Bicycle Thieves, where's the director? Where is Vittorio De Sica? The camera just always happens to be in the right place at the right time, but you never notice. It's just there. It's unobtrusive. And I think that certain works of art where you dive into it and you forget that you're watching an old movie, a silent movie, a foreign movie, a black and white movie, whatever, and you are just immersed and you just take at face value. This is the story. This is the image. And you're not thinking about, wow, what a shot. John Huston said the greatest compliment he ever got about his camera work is nobody ever talked about it. John Ford, every shot is a painting.
That is amazing insight. Thank you. One other thing I wanted to mention about about Time After Time. So McDowell and Steenburgen fall in love, and they have 2 kids. They get married. This is the first of 2 times you'll play matchmaker in a movie, right?
Yeah, I thought what a great director. I had no idea what was really going on. I just thought, wow, you certainly coaxed performances out of them. You really believe they're in love.
Yeah. And the whole premise of the movie, H.G. Wells going back in time to stop Jack the Ripper, who took his time machine to go back to San Francisco.
Let me interrupt long enough to say this was not my idea. When the 7% Solution was on the bestseller list, a guy who had been at graduate school when I was an undergrad at the University of Iowa and the Writers' Workshop contacted me. And he said, I'm writing a novel sort of inspired by yours. I've got 65 pages and an outline. Would you read it and tell me what you think? And in those days, I had time for this sort of thing. And I said, oh, sure. So I read his 65 pages, which was the premise you've just articulated. And I gave him a whole bunch of notes, what I thought. But then I just couldn't stop thinking about it, even if I didn't kind of like everything that he was doing with it. I was making up my own version of it. And I woke up, 3 weeks later, because I'm not so fast. And I said, oh, you're an idiot. Why don't you just option his story? So I optioned the story. Then I wrote the screenplay the way I wanted it. And then I gave him the screenplay and I said, help yourself. Anything you want, just take it. So it wasn't my idea. His name is Carl Alexander. It was Carl Alexander's idea.
Well, good for Carl and good for you for recognizing it and having the time.
Well, I'm great at recognizing other people's ideas.
It became a TV show in 2017.
Yes, I was resolutely squoze out of it.
They took the whole premise. Kevin Williamson, who did the Scream movies and all that, and Freddie Stroma as H.G. Wells, did not last as long as it would have had you been part of it.
I don't think so.
The other thing in your movie, Time After Time, when I was watching it, I was like, oh, Corey Feldman. This is Corey Feldman's film debut. He's just a little guy, the actor.
You know who plays the museum guard at the very beginning?
No.
He's the bartender in High Noon.
Okay.
He's the guy that Gary Cooper slugs in High Noon, who says, you carry a badge and a gun, Marshal. You'd no call to do that. And Gary Cooper looks down and says, you're right. Tries to help him up, but he waves him off. And he was an elderly gentleman at that time. But the moment I realized that he had been in High Noon, I just said, oh, yeah, okay. This is not a big part, but you got to be in this movie.
So that's really cool. Well, did I read this in your book? Spielberg studied your film when doing Back to the Future?
Well, I would love to think that somebody studied it while doing Back to the Future. The funniest line, his name was Larry Blake, who was the museum guard. Somebody said to me, I thought this was very funny. He said, Back to the Future was Time After Time with the smart parts taken out.
I think I read that H.G. Wells goes back on November 5th, and in Back to the Future, they go back on the same day. I didn't verify that, but I don't know. But I love Back to the Future. I think it's a really good movie. Right. And Mary Steenburgen again is in that one. Well, the third one, but okay. All right. So Time After Time, huge success. I'm going to skip Star Trek for 1 second, because I know Star Trek 2 is your next big thing, but I wanted to just talk about The Day After for a second, which is one that you directed, a story about the nuclear holocaust in the early 80s. That's something that's, I think I would have been 13, but movie that stuck with me forever, which I think was the intention, but unbelievable movie. How difficult was it making that movie?
It's the movie I mean, my real claim to fame here, not only is it the most watched movie ever made for television, 100 million people watched it in one night, and they showed it in the Soviet Union, but the movie's real effect, which I only later learned, it was the movie that changed President Ronald Reagan's mind about a winnable nuclear war. He was so shook by the movie, and there's a lot of people who saw him shook by the movie, including his biographer, Edmund, the guy who wrote the Theodore Roosevelt books, blanking on it at the moment. It'll come to me. But anyway, he was the biographer, and he was living in the White House as Reagan's official biographer. He said the only time he ever saw him flip out was when he saw The Day After, and eventually it sent him to Reykjavik, Iceland, to meet with Soviet Premier Gorbachev and sign the Intermediate Range Missile Treaty, which is the only treaty that ever resulted in the physical dismantling of nuclear weapons. So I at least helped postpone World War III.
And still going strong. So, thank you, sir. Was that just like an emotionally trying time? Or was that like physically and emotionally a difficult film to even make? I mean, it's so visually...
Well, there are two aspects to making it. One is the physical difficulty of making any movie. It's 24/7, no sleep, and you are at the mercy of a million variables, actors' temperaments, budget considerations, changes in the weather, a million things that can keep you up at night, or at least can keep me up at night. But the other thing that was going on was a whole reaction from conservative America, led by William Buckley and Phyllis Schlafly, coming out against the idea of this movie. The movie takes no position on who started the war, whether it was the United States or the Soviet Union. It's not a political film in that sense. All it tries to depict, as accurately as the budget and science as we knew it then would allow, is if there were to be a nuclear war between the United States and Russia, what would it be like? What would the, you should pardon the expression, fallout be? And the answer is not good. It would be bad. And that's what we tried to depict, no matter how many people tried to politicize it. And I admit that when I found myself making this movie, and I didn't want to make the movie because who wants to think about nuclear war? That's the worst problem about nuclear wars. Nobody wants to think about it. So we hope it won't happen. But hope is not a strategy. Hope is not a formula. Anyway, I kind of got backed into it. This is my shrink said, I think this is where we find out who you really are. And that was checkmate. So I wound up, because I wasn't even the first director who was asked. I think I was the third. So I found myself doing it. And then I had this rather grandiose idea that it would unseat Ronald Reagan. And then I had to learn that as I was working on it, that you can't make a propaganda piece or you'll wreck it. You can only make a kind of public service announcement. Smokey the Bear, only you can prevent forest fires. If you have a nuclear war, take a look. It's going to be something like this. P.S. on a good day. And leave it at that. And let people make up their minds how you want to avoid such a thing. And I'm sure there's probably more than one way.
Well, it stuck with me forever. Jason Robards happens to also be one of my favorite actors. So that's a hell of a cast as well. But let's talk Star Trek, because you revitalized and brought interest back to Sherlock Holmes, but also Star Trek after Star Trek the Motion Picture. Financially successful, but didn't light the world on fire. As a matter of fact, I kind of watched some of it. I wanted to go back and just see it visually. And I realized I don't think I've ever seen it again since seeing it the very first time. Unlike Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which I've probably seen a bazillion times and have the poster.
Thank you. I don't knock the first movie. I think somebody had to go boldly, or actually, yes, going boldly is correct. Boldly going is wrong. To go boldly where nobody had gone before, and it was Robert Wise. And so it's easy for some people to knock that finished movie. But I'm not one of those people because I think I learned a lot, from the trail that he sort of blazed, even if I didn't want to go in the same direction, which I didn't.
So what they do, they come to you and they're like, all right, we got some heat here, but we need to take this to a whole nother level. Star Wars is now kind of prevalent. And so they need to kind of compete. So they're
Well,
like,
I think they were only doing Star Trek because of Star Wars being such a hit. And in 1979, when Star Trek the Motion Picture came out, that was a runaway production. That was $45 million back then. And it still made money, no matter what some people thought of it. I had never seen Star Trek. I didn't know anything about it. But a mutual friend, childhood friend, who was an executive at Paramount, suggested that I sit down with a man named Harve Bennett, who had been assigned to produce the second Star Trek movie. As I say, I didn't know anything about Trek, but I really loved Harve. We got along really well. And he showed me the movie and he showed me some of the episodes. And, it was like looking at Swahili to me. I simply didn't, but vaguely, it reminded me of something that I did like if I could only put my finger on what it was. And that turned out to be these other books that I had read when I was 13 about Captain Horatio Hornblower by a guy who called himself C.S. Forrester. He wrote The African Queen. And Captain Hornblower, or Admiral or Midshipman, because he had all the different ranks, is in the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars. And he has many adventures. And he has a girl in every port. And when you're 13, this sounds kind of not too shabby. And maybe not just when you're 13. This is pretty cool stuff. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Captain Kirk is sort of like Hornblower, only in outer space. Oh, I know how to do that. I know how to do Hornblower in space. And so I made my submarine movie, whatever you want to call it. And I just made everything about the Navy. And, and I still didn't understand what was important about Star Trek. It took me another 30 years to figure out why a show with an international, intergenerational, intersexual, interracial cast about people coming together to do good stuff was important and precedent setting. Of course, that went all by me at the time. All I could see was the guy with pointy ears and the cheesy sets.
No, I loved it. Kind of looking back and realizing, oh, okay, you're the one that kind of brought in the new uniforms and
all of that.
Yeah, the whole look, which I think that became the look of Star Trek moving forward. But like just the whole idea and like the whole maybe what made Star Trek, because I don't know that I was a Star Wars guy. So, but Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, I think, is still hands down. I wasn't a huge Star Trek person in that I didn't watch every episode or anything like that. I liked Star Trek, but I got really sucked in by Wrath of Khan. It's probably has a lot to do with the fact that you didn't know much about Star Trek or anything, learned, and then adapted it to how you could understand it and created a story around that, which I think made it more appealing to a wider audience.
The Star Trek movies that I worked on, wrote or directed or directed, Star Treks 2, 4, and 6, they more or less left me alone. For various reasons, they were busy with more important things, the suits and all that stuff. So, because I've been in writers' rooms, I've even been in Star Trek writers' rooms, and I'm not a good fit. So it's just kind of better if I just get to do it how I think. And
well, interestingly enough, living through the Star Trek movies all coming out, it was always said, and people would always say, and it was clear, like, oh, you want to see a good one, go see an even numbered one. And then I'm like, oh, Nicholas Meyer. They are Bennett. Like that's 246 for you right there. It was interesting, the whole process. You cranked out the script in 12 days based on ideas from all the failed scripts, taking some of the best elements. And I guess the question is, did you always know Spock was going to die? Is that always part of the film?
Yes, it was a given. The story that I heard, and it's what I heard, I don't know, I verify it, is that after the first movie, Leonard was not keen to go back and do Spock anymore. And Harve said, come back and we'll give you a great death scene. And then we had to figure out the great death scene.
It was a great death scene. It's got the two big quotables in it. I am and always will be your friend, and the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. And
yeah, dialogue is mine.
yeah, well, kudos to you, sir. I mean, these are lines that like just stick. I rewatched some of it. It was like Shatner when he was found Spock, and they were like, he's gone, Jim. He's already gone. And like the look on Shatner's face. It's like, it's a pretty powerful scene just overall. So my follow-up question to all that is, was the hints of the resurrection always part of the plan as well? Or at some point, people are like, oh.
They were not. The idea of resurrecting Spock was an idea that I fought, and I didn't film it. I didn't want any part of it. I just thought a lot of people love this guy. It's sort of unforgivable to just say, oh, wait, we're kidding. Kind of Abraham and Isaac type thing. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I shouldn't have kicked up such a fuss. As I can't remember, is it Clemenza? It's not Clemenza in The Godfather. It says, tell Michael it was just business. And maybe I just sort of seen it as it's just business. And by the time we got to Leonard filming the scene, even Leonard was having second thoughts about whether he really wanted to say goodbye to this character. Because it was clear, I think, to a lot of people that the movie was kind of really cooking with gas. And do you really want to walk away from the table when you're on a winning streak?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, good for Leonard Nimoy that he resurrected himself in the next movie, because his character sort of was a thread through all the other generations of Star Trek as well. I mean, he just showed up all the time and even other iterations. Ricardo Montalban, Khan from Space Seed. I mean, he's amazing in this movie. And the other quotable, which runs in my head all the time, one of my favorite lines from this movie is when he goes, this is CT Alpha 5. Love that. It's just his delivery of that line. I could listen to it. I don't know why. It's amazing. I love it.
Sometimes, maybe more times than we would like to believe, actors don't get roles that are worthy of their talents. Can spend a whole lifetime playing this role and that role and the other role. And was an actor named Adolf Caesar who's in the play and the movie A Soldier's Story, Norman Jewison picture. This was a very elderly actor by the time he got the role that he'd been waiting for all his life. And I think Montalban, who was a lovely man and had so much talent, it's unbelievable. And I said to him while I was watching him as Khan, I said, you should be playing King Lear. You were made to play that role. And he never got the chance. Khan was as close as it comes.
He was awesome. I love everything he did was unbelievable. The other kind of thing that I found interesting from your memoir, Shatner originally hated the script. I mean, you turned him, but but Shatner originally wasn't jiving with your first draft.
Well, I was learning, and I was learning how to write for a star, because what I understood and what Harve Bennett helped me to understand is what it was that Bill didn't like about the script. And put simply, he wanted to be the first man through the door. If it's Captain Kirk has to dominate the action. And so it was very easy to, in effect, I think it was the work of 12 hours, to make sure he was the first guy through the door and everything that related to that. And then he loved it. And he loved it. And I'm not sure he was in any sense wrong about his perceptions and concerns. He was not analytical. He was not capable of saying, hey, I'm never the first man through the door here. All he could say is, oh, this script sucks. And then when we figured out how easy it was to correct, then he was very happy.
This movie selected for the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. That's pretty cool. And then it was originally called Undiscovered Country, which you later used later. And then it went through a Vengeance of Khan phase as well.
None of those. My only title was The Undiscovered Country. And then I was told while I was making the movie that the movie was now going to be called The Vengeance of Khan. The brains on the East Coast had renamed the movie, although, as I ascertained, they hadn't read the script and they hadn't seen any dailies. And they were apparently indifferent to the idea that George Lucas, with whom they were in business on the Indiana Jones franchise, was making the second Star Wars movie, which was being at the time called The Revenge of the Jedi, until somebody pointed out that Jedi don't go for revenge, right? And then it became The Return of the Jedi. But at the time, Paramount says, I said, do you really think that George Lucas is going to be happy with the Vengeance of Khan? They said, oh, that won't be a problem. And the next thing you know, I have Barry Diller yelling at me, who the fuck knows what Roth means? What is Roth? That's the stupidest title I ever heard.
Oh man, it sounds the running theme here is the studios don't really know. And Wrath of Khan is like the greatest subtitle of anything. So did you not do 3 because you're doing the day after?
No, I didn't do 3 because I didn't know how to do Resurrection.
Got it. So Nimoy takes over that, and then he directs, but you co-write Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, another time travel to San Francisco.
I wrote the bulk of it.
Yeah.
Everything on Earth.
So that's most of the movie.
Which is also a retread of Time After Time, except they're coming from the future instead of the past. They even wind up in the same damn city. I said, why can't we do it in Paris? Why can't they go to Paris? And they said, the whales wouldn't fit in the Seine.
Oh, man. Well, it was great. And then I guess I read you got to use a joke that you had cut out of the movie out of Time After Time.
Well, yeah, you get to never throw anything away. I had a joke about rock and roll and Time After Time, and I was first time director, and I didn't film it right, so it didn't really work. But then I used it again in Star Trek 4 with the punker on the bus, and Spock gives him the Vulcan nerve pinch, and so that worked.
That's a great scene. And then he falls over, and everyone's like, so good. And then you come back, right, and direct Star Trek 6 after Shatner takes a swing at Star Trek 5, The Undiscovered Country, which is, I love this movie too. This was such a great like swan song. I remember seeing this movie with my dad. Loved the whole movie. I always loved just the Peter Pan reference at the end. Was that just something just something, were you a fan? You just wanted to kind of throw that in, or just kind of?
Well, in art, I hope it doesn't come out, sort of wrong and pompous, but in art, there are sometimes happy accidents. Just things happen. When we were filming the end of Star Trek 2, the very end, I was reading the newspaper while they were lighting the set, and somebody asked Simon Wiesenthal if they thought that Raoul Wallenberg could possibly be still alive. Wiesenthal said, he's not dead as long as we remember him. And I said, wait, stop everything. And I just walked up and put it in the scene because it belonged. It's a happy accident. And I think something very similar was when I was writing the end of Star Trek 6, second star to the right and straight on till morning. It had that kind of whimsy, or at least it was intended to have a kind of whimsy and gentleness.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was a great ending. You get excited when it catch reference. All right, so you made Sulu a captain, so that's awesome. In 6, I read that Roddenberry didn't love that Kirk was kind of a bigot against Klingons. I get why he wouldn't have liked that. It's also why it probably makes the movie so great. But
Gene Roddenberry didn't like any, I think, of my Star Trek movies. He certainly didn't like the Wrath of Khan script. I didn't have any interaction with him on Star Trek 4 at all, because I was the writer, I wasn't the director. On Star Trek 6, when he was elderly and not at all well, we clashed over, just a lot of things. And he saw the movie about 3 days before he died, and he decided he liked it. This is a big digression, but there are creators and I say creators as opposed to creatives, which is a term I can't stand. There are people who have certain messianic qualities, certain charisma that enables them to conjure up a universe where there was nothing before. And it's just an amazing thing that they do. But it is also true that having conjured the thing into being, they don't necessarily possess the managerial skills to keep it going. There are endless examples of boards of governors, boards of directors who reluctantly are forced to oust somebody who brought some, Mothers Against Drunk Driving or whatever it is. The guy who started Filmex, a guy named Gary Esser, was, I believe, forced out by the board for whatever he couldn't do. It's a little bit like this, my Moses Joshua theory. Moses is that messianic prophet-like guy who leads the Jews out of bondage, but he doesn't get to cross the River Jordan. God taps him on the shoulder, gives him a gold watch, and says, "Thank you very much for your service. Joshua is going to take it from here." And Joshua is not a messianic guy. Joshua sends spies into the land of Canaan. Joshua is a can-do general. He's a consolidator of something. There are some people who start things and are perfectly capable of managing them, but not always and not frequently. And I think Gene, who brought Star Trek into being, and this cannot be denied, and there's no reason to deny it, but he was less successful, certainly when they got to the movie point, of overseeing that transition from the TV shows to the movies. I think that's a fair statement. And he was resentful and proprietary and was unable and unwilling to sort of let go and pass the torch.
Totally get it. It totally makes sense. It's hard when it's your baby and then people want to move in the direction. But you're absolutely right. It's like some things need someone else to carry it the next mile, whatever that might be. Christian Slater is in this real quick. That's all. That was, I remember, thing that was awesome. Kim Cattrall is in this. Awesome. Christopher Plummer, excellent villain. And you brought David Warner in, even. Jack the Ripper from Time After Time. Chancellor Gorkin. Great movie. I loved all your Star Trek movies.
Thank you.
I loved all your movies. You're so awesome. Appreciate you spending all this time with me. This is so amazing.
Thanks. It's been great.
Yeah, it's great. So we talk about everyone should go buy your book. Go buy this amazing Sherlock Holmes book. It's the first Sherlock Holmes book I read, The Real Thing. And now I'm going to go down the Sherlock Holmes.
It's a gateway drug.
It's my Sherlock Holmes gateway drug. Anyway, it was fun just kind of revisiting all your work that I loved, just watching throughout the years.
Thank you.
So you also directed The Volunteers, because I mentioned you were a matchmaker. Tom Hanks and
Rita Wilson,
reconnected on that film, got married. Yeah, wrote The Prince of Egypt. I mean, which is probably why you were so quick on the Moses story. I haven't even scratched the surface of everything you directed or wrote.
We'll come back and do it again.
Awesome. Would love that. All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Talk soon, I hope.